Welcome to Decades of Heistery, where we cover safecrackers and bank heists from 1926 up until U.S. involvement in World War II. April 1927 follow-ups, we get to see Oklahoman teen Dave Brown revisit the uncanny luck of bank worker John Meyers, see yet another rendition of the Sacco and Vanzetti and Celestino Madeiros show, plus the return of the mummy. All that and more in our 1927 follow-up edition of Decades of Heistery. We follow up on one of our main stories from March of 1927, in which we covered 19-year-old Oklahoman Dave Brown, who admitted to having participated in robbing the bank at Jet, Oklahoma. Here we see Dave Brown on the right, and appearing, in my estimation, to look more like a 40-year-old than a 19-year-old, so very mature. And we see Judge Charles Swindoll on the left. The photograph retrospective was titled To Death Chair, Shielding Pal, and appeared in the Bismarck Tribune for April 7, 1927. We learned that unnamed welfare organizations offered some form of protest to the judge, hoping he'd reconsider the death penalty for Brown. Brown's May 20, 1927 date with the electric chair was coming soon, so we'll possibly end up seeing his demise in next month's follow-up video. The Cody Enterprise covered our next story with its April 20, 1927 edition, and this is uncanny. Back in July of 1926, the same paper covered a story about a California bank heist. The rationale for covering it was that a past resident of Cody, Wyoming, John Meyers, had played a large role in the caper. It was called one of California's, quote, greatest and boldest bank robberies, end quote, and took place at the Marine Trust and Savings Bank at Long Beach, California. John Meyers was a watchman guard at the bank and had come there with a reputation for being very capable with a gun. Unfortunately, during that robbery, the robbers got the drop on him and ended up escaping with $10,000, or as the paper stated, quote, made away with the swag, end quote. So for most people, that sounds like the frightening once-in-a-lifetime event. So now we fast forward to this April 1927 edition and a story titled, John Meyers Plays Role in Bank Robbery. It's subtitled, He and Mrs. Meyers Held Up, Tied Hand and Foot, and Keys of Bank Taken from Former. This was not a look back, like a year in review type of article. Meyers was then listed as a janitor of the Marine, or as it was being called in this edition, the Bank of Italy of LA, of Los Angeles. Not sure if the bank carried a colloquial nickname like some of them did back then, if it had changed or if it had always been known as both. This article did note that the perpetrator of the July 1926 heist had never knowingly been caught. Well, I'll be darned if the same bank wasn't hit again, this time for $2,000. Here's how the heist went down. A robber entered the Meyers home while they were away. When they returned, the robber surprised them, along with a neighbor lady who had accompanied them, who apparently was going to use the Meyers phone to place a call. The robber tied them together, hand and foot, lying side by side on the floor. The robber then took the keys from Meyers' pocket and then, I kid you not, covered them with a comforter. The robber then entered the bank and surprised the 3 clerks who were working after bank hours and tied them together in a similar manner and put them in a closet. This robber then patiently awaited the return of the manager. When the manager arrived, he tied the manager up and added him to the trio in the closet. Mr. Bandit, as the Cody Enterprise cutely named him, then grabbed all the currency he could, bypassing gold and silver. Mr. Bandit overlooked at least between $1,800 and $2,000 more in currency that was located in a teller's cage. The kicker, John Meyers recognized the robber. He noted it was the same robber from the July heist. In fact, Meyers and Mr. Bandit had, at some point a brief conversation during which the robber admitted he'd done the July caper. Myers noted that the thief had a thick German accent and was, quote, very precise and methodical in his work, end quote. Mr. Bandit was also quite congenial, as he had a bottle of whiskey and offered it around to several of the men for a drink at some point. So more on Myers unless his luck holds out, and definitely more on our German friend Herr Bandit if we come across him. Sacco, Vanzetti, and Celestino Madeiros once again make an appearance. I have covered Sacco and Vanzetti in a handful of previous episodes only because of their possible connection to Celestino Madeiros. Madeiros was the one who gives us our bank robbery connection. Well, the New Britain Daily Herald starts us off with its April 9, 1927 front page story titled Sacco, Vanzetti sentenced again. Subtitled, their execution is set for week of July 10. Secondary subtitle, Worldwide Protestation. And the last subtitle, Judge Thayer, who presided at original trial, imposes sentence this morning, courthouse strongly guarded. Indeed, Sacco and Vanzetti had been sentenced again after their 1921 conviction for murder in the first degree. Upon sentencing, Judge Thayer asked Sacco, quote, have you anything to say why sentence of death should not be pronounced on you, end quote. To which Sacco said, quote, yes. And then he stepped forward and said, quote, I never knew, I never heard, I never read, even in history, of the oppression or cruelty of this court. After 7 years of prosecution, they still consider us guilty, end quote. And he went on, he added more about class warfare, as he was an ardent socialist and clearly a true believer in that political philosophy. Well, the Douglas Daily Dispatch offered a front page story 3 days later titled Sacco Vanzetti Case Reaches Massachusetts Legislature. It appeared that Massachusetts Governor Allen T. Fuller's office was being inundated with letters, telegrams, and even cablegrams as a form of written protest for the death sentence given by Judge Thayer. A Massachusetts representative named Roland D. Sawyer even introduced a resolution for an appointment of a committee to investigate the entire case. Strangely, the Douglas Daily Dispatch noted protests were received from Panama, French authors and scientists, and 203 Wellesley College students. So that's quite an array. Extra guards had been placed at the State House, various courthouses, and even Massachusetts judges' homes spread throughout the state. By the end of the month, according to the Producer's News, appeals for Sacco and Vanzetti are stacked high on Governor Fuller's desk. It seemed that Massachusetts was really in an uproar, and that many held the belief that it was Sacco and Vanzetti's, quote, radicalism, end quote, that was really the issue, not their alleged involvement in the famous payroll robbery. Recall, Madeiros has held fast that he was part of the gang that did the job, and neither Sacco nor Vanzetti was involved. The article noted that all of Boston was talking about the case, despite the fact that the opening of the baseball season in that sports-crazed city had just recently taken place. It seemed that battle lines between anti-labor courts and workers had been drawn, and participants had reached a fever pitch. Well, believe me, the Daily Worker has something to say. Its April 29, 1927 front page stated, Save Madeiros to testify in Vanzetti case. It was subtitled, Workers Continue to Demand Freedom. This case at the time was truly international in scope and reach. Well, that protest led one Frank A. Brooks, who was chair of the state parole board, to advise Governor Fuller to grant a third reprieve for Celestino Madeiros, noted as, quote, payroll murderer, end quote, and who had, quote, confessed that he participated in the job for which Sacco and Vanzetti have been condemned to die July 10th, end quote. Madeiros had killed James A. Carpenter, a Wrentham, Massachusetts bank teller back in 1924. Interesting that they call Madeiros a payroll murderer, since the Rice and Hutchins shoe factory heist had been called the payroll murder story. Well, based on reporting, it seemed that Fuller was not going to name a special commission to reinvestigate the case. Instead, he was going to name Brooks to review it. Brooks was known to have, quote, been impressed with the confessions signed by Madeiros, practically implicating the Morelli gang, end quote, which we covered previously. Brooks actually spent the 28th with Madeiros in the cell at the Charlestown State Prison. The American Federation of Labor had not sent Fuller any word, which I would have expected they would have. However, Sacco and Vanzetti prepared a statement of appeal and objected profusely against their own attorney, William G. Thompson, who sought for them to sign a plea in order for a pardon. I've stated numerous times that we were done with Sacco and Vanzetti as it relates to Celestino Madeiros. I'll not fall into that trap again. I will update as warranted. So now from the serious to the sort of silly, do we see a return of the mummy, or are we witnessing a copycat? We turn possibly for the first time to the Bozeman Courier and its April 22nd, 1927 front page. The story is titled Daring Robbery at East Helena, and it was subtitled Bandit Raids Bank, Locks Employees in Vault, and Escapes with More Than $3,300. As per usual, it was called, quote, one of the most daring bank robberies in the state in several years, end quote. Well, regardless, we head to the East Helena State Bank. The paper said the heist occurred on Tuesday morning, which I assume means April 19th. Here's how it went down. A robber, his, quote, face swathed in bandages, end quote, entered the bank at 9:30 o'clock. Is this a coincidence? This sounds familiar to the story covered in our quick hitter video in March of 1927 titled Heist of the Mummy. Well, this possible mummy approached the teller's window, covering cashier R.H. Short and bookkeeper Steve Gross with a revolver. He ordered them to lie on the floor face down. He looted the cash drawer, forced them to open the safe in the vault, looted it, and then exited, locking them in the vault behind him. He escaped with that $3,300 in currency and coin, broken down thus: $1,000 in silver, $1,165 in gold, $23 in penny, and the balance in currency of $5, $10, and $20 denominations. And even more detail, he took off in a black Chevy touring car noted to have, quote, side curtains, end quote, and headed toward Townsend, Montana. An unnamed source thought he doubled back and headed in the area of or within Helena, Montana. The robbery was fully covered by insurance, and it was noted that he'd actually inadvertently overlooked $5,127 in cash. Well, the producer's news followed up a week later with Bandit holds up East Helena Bank, escapes with $4,500. The story was subtitled Employees Locked in Vault by Man Whom They Mistook for Injured Smelter Worker. Sheriff and his deputies search Helena Hills, robber still at large. The possibility that the lone robber was an injured smelter worker is certainly new. Maybe this wasn't the work of the mummy who hit that LA bank back in March. Or maybe. Well, we learned that the cashier and the bookkeeper were released 15 minutes after they'd been locked in there, but by then, of course, the robber was long gone. Apparently, a farmer named A.O. Cooper came in to make a deposit and actually heard them shouting from the vault. It sounds like Cooper left, went to the pharmacy, and told the druggist there, E.A. Richardson, who then called bank president J.R. Libby. The sheriff noted in that subtitle was one Sheriff Burgess, and he was out with several deputies at the time searching for the injured smelter worker or the mummy. Well, Sheriff Burgess sent word to Great Falls, Montana Sheriff Bob Gordon to be advised and to keep a lookout for what Burgess thought at the time were two men, not a solo robber. But Burgess didn't sound particularly glowing about the likelihood of capturing this mummy injured smelter worker or the duo. Quote, "We may not accomplish anything in the end," end quote, and quote, "We are putting all we have into this last play, and if we lose on it, we'll have to start over," end quote. Well, was this the mummy? It wasn't unusual for robbers to travel distances, though from LA to Helena, Montana is pretty far, and they tended to be more, it seems like, more regional. So I'm not sure. But regardless, we'll follow up on the mummy, Madeiros, Meyers, and Brown for future updates. Next up, we'll have new stories in the quick hitter format, including a westward swing to Kansas and Colorado. We'll see a California robber shot down. Plus, we add more embezzling and even a bond scam to our robbery quiver. I want to thank you for spending your time with Decades of History. Till next time.